Hey everyone, welcome to this week's conversation with Dr. Stephen Nedd about the body and how to fix, protect, or maintain it using outside-the-box alternative solutions. If you're a big fan of the pharmaceutical or surgical approach, you are so in the wrong place, because on this podcast, we're not going to be pushing the conventional medicine methods or way of thinking about health. If you're looking for another way to live longer and healthier, join me, Ron Nedd, and my brother Dr. Stephen Nedd for this week's body chat about sugar blues. Me? I'm a retired Twin Cities chiropractor currently helping people buy and sell homes in the Tampa Bay and Los Angeles areas. My brother has a thriving chiropractic practice in the Clearwater area of Tampa Bay, Florida. In this podcast, we're going to chat about all sorts of topics related to health, nutrition, exercise, just about everything having to do with the body. You're invited to listen in to our body chat, but don't forget that neither of us is giving you health advice, so don't rush off to do something without either checking with your doctor first or seeing Dr. Stephen Nedd as a patient at his office. Good evening, Steve.
Good evening, Ron.
So today we're going to piss off a lot of people. We're going to make them think twice about their desserts. Doesn't mean they're necessarily going to stop, but they're going to think twice about it because we're going to be talking about sugar blues. And this was coming from a book that I remember reading back in chiropractic college that gave me such information about sugar. It gave me a lot of information about sugar I had no idea about before. And from what you've been saying this past week, the same thing's happened for you.
That's right. This book blew me away, and I wish I'd read it a long time ago.
Yes, it's a really, really good book. So let's start out with just some simple stuff, like what are the different forms of sugar and what are the differences between them?
Okay, well, I'd like to break this down into two categories. Sugar that ends with the suffix "ose" and then other name forms.
Okay.
So we have glucose. That's blood sugar. And it's also found with other sugars in fruits and vegetables.
Is that the first or second category? Because that ends with an E.
O-S-E.
Oh, I get it now.
Yeah.
I thought you meant that they end with the letter O.
No.
So it's O-S-E. Okay, good.
Okay.
So now I feel much better. So, all right, glucose is the first one, and that is the blood sugar.
Yeah. Fructose, which is fruit sugar.
Mm-hmm.
Dextrose, also known as corn sugar, it's made synthetically from starch, especially corn.
Okay.
Then there's maltose, which is malt sugar.
Mm-hmm.
Lactose, which is milk sugar.
Mm-hmm.
And sucrose, which is refined sugar from sugar cane and sugar beets.
Okay.
So the other name forms, I have lots of details here because we're just not taught how to read food labels. So this will really help people to do that.
All right, good. Well, I mean, just clearing up all those ones with the O's at the end was good because those are the most common ones I think that we see.
That's correct.
All right, good. So why don't you continue with the next forms?
All right. So the first one I'm going to start with is evaporated cane juice.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is a slightly less processed sweetener than table sugar made from the stalks of sugar cane. Mm-hmm. And the juice from the sugar cane is filtered, evaporated into a syrup, and then it's crystallized and cured. It's tan in color and has a slight molasses flavor. A teaspoon of this gives you 15 calories and 4 grams of carbohydrates versus 1 teaspoon of table sugar, which gives you 16 calories and 4 grams of carbohydrates. So they're basically identical, except for 1 calorie.
Okay.
It's also depleted of vitamins, minerals, and fiber like table sugar. Mm-hmm. But if it's organic, it's the lesser of evils just because it's labeled organic.
All right. So it doesn't have the chemicals that the other has, but it still has the same type of bad effects on the body.
That's right.
Okay.
Then we have raw turbinado, which is also known as raw sugar or sugar in the raw. Mm-hmm. This is a less processed form than table sugar or evaporated cane juice since it's created with the first sugarcane pressings. What happens is the sugarcane is crushed naturally and the juice is allowed to evaporate naturally. Then it's crystallized into the characteristic large crystals. Mm-hmm. And these attract water because of the soft texture of them. So it kind of sucks up water like a sponge.
Okay.
And because of that, it's touted because it contains less calories because of the water weight that's also taken into account.
Okay.
Yeah. And it still contains minerals like calcium, copper, iron, magnesium, manganese, phosphorus, and potassium that are normally processed out of table sugar and evaporated cane juice.
So in other words, it is actually healthier than cane sugar and evaporated cane juice.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, interesting. When you said raw turbinado, I thought that could be a stripper's name. Okay, good luck carrying on from this point.
Oh boy. Okay. Refined sugar is also called table sugar, white sugar, or sucrose. Okay. And it's the least healthy of all because it undergoes the most processing, removing 90% of all the original parts of the sugar cane that it comes from.
All right. So it's got almost no minerals in it at all.
None.
Okay.
Right. And by the way, the white color of table sugar comes from using bone char from the bones of cows. So technically, it is unsuitable for vegans, whereas raw sugar and evaporated cane juice is okay. And that's kind of like the McDonald's French fries controversy in the US and Canada with their natural beef flavoring, which is not only made from milk, but also contains MSG.
Yeah, of course, McDonald's.
Yeah.
We'll have to do a podcast just on that one, but we'll get our attorneys lined up first.
Okay.
So now let's step back just a second. You've got raw sugar and then you've got refined sugar. So can you help clarify the difference between those two?
Yeah, refined sugar means they basically stripped it of everything. Over 90% of what it was originally there is gone by the time they get done. And so it's nutritionally bankrupt, whereas the raw sugar has only been processed once. I mean, they just basically crush the sugar cane and it still contains quite a bit of the original nutrition.
Okay, so that clarifies that. So if somebody was, they're stuck in a food desert, whatever the heck that is, and they only have the choice of raw sugar and refined sugar, that raw sugar will kill them slower than refined sugar will.
Yeah, probably.
Okay, good. So continue on.
Okay, then there's molasses. Molasses is a thick brown syrup obtained from processing sugar. And it's essentially the residual substance that's separated from the refined sugar crystals.
So that would be the thing that has all the minerals in it?
Yeah, that's what's left over when they create the crystals. That's where all the good stuff ends up.
So then it sounds like molasses is actually a somewhat healthy form of sweetener.
Right. It actually has nutritional value since it contains trace amounts of vitamins and a decent amount of minerals along with antioxidants.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So why do they call it blackstrap molasses?
Well, that means that the residue from the processed sugar is boiled 3 times to create a dark, concentrated syrup while still maintaining all of the nutrients, including minerals as well as the B vitamins. So it's much healthier.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So that's, was there any more on blackstrap molasses?
That's it.
Okay. And what about brown sugar?
Well, brown sugar is simply white sugar with a little molasses added to it to darken it. So it's also known as white sugar wearing a mask.
Interesting. Is it really known that way?
Yeah. And the difference between light brown sugar and dark brown sugar is light brown sugar contains 13% molasses and dark brown sugar contains 14% molasses.
Oh, well, obviously you're going to want to go for the dark brown.
Right.
It's like when you buy bread that's enriched with vitamins, that's like taking somebody, robbing them, taking their wallet, taking their money, taking all their jewelry, taking them all their clothes, and giving their socks back.
Well, that's probably a good analogy.
Yes. So brown sugar basically is they stripped out all of the nutrients and they put a little bit back in.
That's right.
Okay.
Now I have 2 more. The first one is maltodextrin. Like dextrose, it's artificially produced from starches, and these include corn, rice, potato starch, or wheat. And it's a common food additive found in more than half of all packaged foods, used as an inexpensive filler to add bulk, improve texture, and serve as a substitute for fat or sugar, or as a preservative to increase the product's shelf life.
That doesn't sound very healthy.
It isn't.
Okay.
And then I saved this one for last because it has caused the most confusion, and that's high fructose corn syrup.
Yes.
Now, many consumers think of fructose as a healthy sugar since it comes from fruit.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yes, if you eat a whole fruit that contains fructose, it's normally okay since it also contains all the vitamins and minerals, enzymes, and fiber necessary to properly digest it.
Mm-hmm.
However, industrial or processed fructose, primarily high fructose corn syrup, which actually contains both fructose and glucose, is just like table sugar because it's stripped of all the nutrients and will result in similar conditions as table sugar consumption.
Okay. I'm a little confused because you said it contains glucose, which is blood sugar.
Yeah, high fructose corn syrup contains both fructose and glucose.
All right. So glucose, you'd mentioned earlier that's blood sugar, which is correct. But you can also have, like if you're in the hospital, they can give you a bag of glucose, which is basically sugar water. So this is a similar type of thing. So it's an artificial type of sugar, or it's just sugar water or something like that. So fructose is not a quote unquote healthy sugar because it comes from fruit. It's another refined form of sugar.
That's right. And we're going to get a little bit more into that. We're going to dig a little deeper in the next section.
Okay, good. So then now, how does the body process sugar? And is there any difference between what happens in the body based on what form of sugar is eaten?
Well, in simple terms, your body breaks down all forms of sugar from food into glucose. Again, blood sugar, in the bloodstream, and it's primarily used for energy. Now, some of it's stored in the liver and muscles, and the remainder is either transported out of the body via the intestines, or it's stored as fat.
Okay.
The levels in the blood are controlled and balanced with the help of insulin from the pancreas.
Right.
Figured I'd make it simple for everybody to follow here.
Okay. Well, that makes sense.
So now getting into the differences of the different ones that we covered before. And let's just start with table sugar again, or sucrose.
Okay.
It's actually often called an anti-nutrient, which means worse than eating nothing.
Wow.
Yeah, because it provides empty calories and the original vitamins and minerals that naturally occur in sugarcane are completely removed. So when you use table sugar, you literally have to rob your body of its stored vitamins and minerals in order to digest, detoxify, and eliminate it from the body.
Very interesting.
Its use can also result in nutritional deficiency conditions and diseases, including scurvy, tuberculosis, diabetes, tooth cavities, as you know, fatty liver, obesity, cancer, and heart disease. And that's the short list.
Wow.
Yeah, bad news.
Okay.
Evaporated cane juice and brown sugar are almost identical to table sugar in content and how the body processes them. So they're on the bad list of sugars to avoid.
Now, which ones are those?
Evaporated cane juice and brown sugar.
Okay, good to know.
Now, raw turbinado and molasses are easier to process since they still contain nutrients that are processed out of the table sugar and evaporated cane juice.
So they help in the digestion and your body to actually deal with the sugar then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now let's get back to maltodextrin. It's basically just as bad as sugar since it's also nutritionally bankrupt with no vitamins and minerals. And it's actually sometimes worse than having sugar, especially since it has a higher glycemic index than sugar.
Okay, explain to people what the glycemic index is. They may have learned about it from those just wonderful commercials by that diet company that might even be the one that did that meal replacement drink, but we won't talk about that.
Okay.
But it probably wasn't something that was explained as well as you can explain it.
Yeah, I mean, to make it simple, glycemic index is a number that's assigned to foods based on how slowly or quickly those foods cause an increase in blood sugar levels.
Okay.
So you want this number to be lower, which puts less stress on the body, particularly the liver and the pancreas.
All right. So the lower the glycemic index,
the slower it takes for it to be digested. So it's easier on the liver and pancreas because then the pancreas doesn't have to produce insulin so quickly.
So it doesn't immediately turn into sugar and spike your blood sugar level and all that stuff like that.
That's correct.
Okay. That's helpful.
Yeah. So maltodextrin, like sugar, gets into your bloodstream fast. And if you take too much, it'll get stored as fat also.
Okay. Yeah. Not good.
No. Okay. And then let's get back to fructose again. So I recommend reading an excellent article by Dr. Joseph Mercola titled Caution on Fructose Consumption. Do this and you'll likely gain 15 pounds next year.
Oh.
Yeah. So in it, he includes the bombshell that fructose is far more dangerous than any other form of sugar, mainly due to the fact that your body metabolizes fructose differently. So when you break down fructose, the entire burden falls on your liver. So fructose is actually classified as a liver toxin since it severely taxes and overloads your liver. This leads to creation of a number of waste products and toxins, including a large amount of uric acid, which drives up blood pressure and can cause gout.
Not good.
Yeah, and this situation with the liver also explains why fructose is the leading cause of obesity.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. Much of the fructose you eat is literally stored as fat. Plus, it has no effect on natural hormone appetite suppressants that glucose actually does. So using fructose leads to a vicious cycle of overeating, weight gain, and ultimately obesity.
Wow.
Yeah.
So in other words, you're better off just downing a 5-pound bag of white sugar than having fructose.
That's right.
Maybe not quite that extreme, but okay. So fructose is the Darth Vader of the sugars.
Yes, it's typically in the corn syrup fructose form. So my advice is when eating fruit, choose fruit with the lowest sugar and fructose content, which includes berries, lemons, and limes.
Right. Yeah. So the berries, you've got blueberries and strawberries and raspberries and blackberries and boysenberries and all the other relatives. So those lemons and limes are the best ones to go for then.
That's right.
Okay. Very good. Well, that's definitely helpful. So we'll just have to get the word out to more people. It's like no maltodextrin, no fructose. Whenever you see somebody that's really overweight, say, I bet you've been eating a lot of fructose.
High fructose corn syrup.
Okay. So you recently reread the book Sugar Blues for this episode, the one that I read back in chiropractic college. What are the 3 most important takeaways from that book that you got reading it again recently, or reading it for the first time actually recently?
Well, that book was actually published in 1975 and it was written by William Duffy. And the 3 most important takeaways were, 1, he pointed out some very alarming injustices, human rights violations, and corruption directly linked to sugar going back many centuries in man's history. The first one is, and this one hits home with me because of how they treated natural healers, which I consider myself.
Right.
Back in the day, they were labeled as heretics, sorcerers, and witches, and this included midwives. And these people just used common sense wisdom like asking what a person ate before they became ill. So they typically gave people herbs and dietary advice, which could include eliminating sugar. Now, this didn't sit well with authorities, including monarchs that were making huge profits from the production and sale of sugar. Many of these natural healers were hung or burned at the stake as a result, and their workable, successful approaches were buried for centuries, unfortunately.
Wow. So how far back was this? Do you know?
Back to the Dark Ages, Middle Ages, and so forth.
So hundreds and hundreds of years ago.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, according to British historian Noel Dare, of the 20 million Africans sold to slavery over 400 plus years, starting in 1444, approximately 2/3 were associated with sugar production in Europe, the United States, the Caribbean, with Cuba being the last destination until 1884. And by the way, a good chunk of the other third was for opiates extracted from the poppy seed of the poppy plant.
Right.
Poppy seed contains opium, but other opiates extracted from this include morphine, codeine, and oxycodone. And heroin is derived from morphine, and shortly after it was first produced in the late 1800s, it was marketed by Bayer, the makers of aspirin, as a non-addictive morphine substitute and cough medicine for children.
Was that cocaine or?
No, that's heroin.
Oh, heroin.
Yeah.
Oh, how nice of them.
I know. Just a nice little piece of trivia there. And then the other thing was psychiatrists for hundreds of years have mislabeled people with subjective complaints due to imbalances caused by sugar intake. This includes depression, manic, hyperactivity, ADHD, and schizophrenia. There's one psychiatrist in particular that William Duffy refers to several times in this book that I'd like to bring up, and that's Benjamin Rush.
Okay.
He signed the Declaration of Independence and is on the seal of the American Psychiatric Association still to this day. And he's known as the father of American medicine and the father of American psychiatry.
Okay.
So it all sounds good.
Mm-hmm. It does. It sounds like, decent, well-respected guy.
But he actually said, sugar contains more nutrients in the same bulk than any other known substance. Wow, that's completely untrue.
Right.
He also coined the term negritude, in which he concluded that the blackness of Africans was due to a form of leprosy.
All right, that's strike two.
Strike two. Now, do you know how George Washington, the first president of the United States, died?
No.
Okay. So he had a sore throat so painful that he couldn't swallow and asked his doctors to bleed him.
Mm-hmm.
Bloodletting was a standard medical practice in those days, made popular by Benjamin Rush, who also recommended using the toxic chemical mercury.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Remember mercurochrome?
Well, not only that, but there's all the controversy over vaccinations and autism and the fact that there is mercury in the base of the vaccinations, which is assumed to be or might be what's causing a lot of these problems. So it's like mercury is not a good thing.
Yeah. So here's what happened to former President Washington. He lost 40% of his blood, which was 80 ounces or 5 pints in a single day. And he died on December 14th, 1799 at the age of 67 as a result.
So he had a bad sore throat and he asked them to do some bloodletting, which was the in thing at that time, kind of like the idiots that do electric shock on infants these days because it does something, or they think it does something, or they say it does something. So they just bleed him and it's like, oh yeah, we'll be back later. And they shut the door and they go off and ride their horses or shoot deer or foxes or something. Then they come back and they go, oh crap, we forgot to turn off the bloodletting. And they come back and it's like, oh, he's down 5 points. Let's get him a beer. And then he's dead.
Yep.
All right. What a bunch of idiots.
I know.
So Benjamin Rush sounds like a pretty nasty guy.
Yes,
okay,
I agree.
Well, thanks for letting us know about that. So that was one of the things that you got out of reading that book. What other things did you get out of reading the book Sugar Blues?
Well, the second thing was the discovery of vitamins in the early 1900s was a direct result of deficiencies caused by the refining or processing of whole foods, including natural unpolished rice into polished rice stripped of its shells called the hulls, whole wheat processed down to a white flour, and sugarcane to table sugar and other forms, as we've already discussed.
Right.
So let me give you some examples. The first vitamin called thiamine, or B1, was isolated from rice bran, which occurs in natural unpolished whole brown rice. Now, because it contained a mysterious natural life force that was discovered by the researcher, he combined vita, the Latin word for life, and amine, short for amino acid, and came up with vitamin. He was able to cure pigeons paralyzed with the condition beriberi, which actually began the same time that polishing machines were introduced to the rice-eating countries of the Orient, and when white rice was introduced in Japan. So it was originally thought to be caused by an infection, but beriberi, which causes weakness, difficulty walking, tingling, loss of sensation in the hands and feet, and can even lead to paralysis. It's simply a vitamin B1 deficiency caused by the processing of foods like whole grain rice into polished rice that's completely deficient of vitamin B1.
All right. So basically, once they started refining and processing things like wheat, rice, sugar, etc., then that's when these vitamin deficiency type conditions started showing up and being diagnosed, and they determined that that's what it was coming from.
Right.
Okay.
So the condition called Palabra, which reached epidemic proportions in the American South in 1914, was also thought to be due to a contagious infection. Now, this was characterized by the appearance of a flame red skin rash. And a doctor examined Palabra victims and found that it wasn't contagious and was actually caused by a diet of refined grains and sugar, leading to the deficiency of the not yet discovered vitamin B3, also known as niacin.
Interesting. Okay.
And then vitamin C. Now, it was discovered in 1936. So in the 1750s, James Lind, a surgeon's mate in the British Navy, began observing multiple cases of scurvy on his own ship. Now, up to that time, thousands of British sailors had died of scurvy. And so they're trying to figure out why.
Mm-hmm.
So he tried different remedies on the crew with scurvy, and the ones that he gave 2 oranges and a lemon each day recovered within a week. So this is interesting. He reported his findings to the British Admiralty, but they were unwilling to accept the fact that scurvy could have been caused by an inadequacy in the Royal Navy rations. Well, why? Well, because everyone knew that the British Empire had the best fed sailors in all of human history, and its navy was superior to all others.
Of course.
Yeah. So they delayed changing the rations and adding citrus for about 50 years, which cost an estimated 100,000 lives.
Wow.
Yeah.
Not the best move on their part.
No. So the British called lemons limes at the time, and their sailors were nicknamed limeys.
Oh, I didn't know that's where that came from.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, Britain's confusion between limes and lemons created a horrible problem years later with Sir George Nares's polar expedition in 1875. Limes were packed for the voyage instead of lemons, and scurvy broke out, ruining the expedition.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right. So then the limes didn't have the level of vitamin C that the lemons did, I guess.
That's right.
Okay. Well, that's good to know.
Yeah. Now, I've got some other miscellaneous things I've learned from the book. One is that countries that had the highest content of sugar in their cigarettes had the highest rate of lung cancer, and countries that produced all air-dried tobacco, similar to the American Indians, were unable to find any correlation between smoking and lung cancer.
Really?
Yeah. Another neat thing I learned was higher sugar intake, resulting in higher sugar in the bloodstream, tends to attract mosquitoes. So it's no accident that the first cases of mosquito-borne yellow fever in the Western Hemisphere occurred in the sugar island of Barbados in 1647, and then it spread to all other ensuing areas where sugar was produced, including other Caribbean islands, Brazil, Spain, Portugal, New Orleans, and finally Cuba.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right. So in other words, if somebody doesn't want the mosquitoes swarming, they shouldn't be eating anything sweet.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Now, is there anything that a person can do to stabilize the wild blood sugar swings if a person or their kids or their grandkids are being forced to eat some cake at a birthday party or something like that?
First thing you should do is make sure they eat some protein to stabilize their blood sugar, because protein keeps blood sugar balanced for long periods of time. So it would be a good idea to call ahead of time to find out if they're serving protein, so you can bring some just in case they don't.
Right. Okay.
And a good thing would be to give the kids a good multivitamin and mineral supplement to handle the deficiencies created and to help buffer the inevitable sugar spike.
Right.
And that should include chromium picolinate, which helps the pancreas make insulin more efficiently to help handle the sugar dump into the bloodstream, obviously.
Now, couldn't they just give the kids chromium picolinate if they're going to a party like that so that it keeps that level and it doesn't spike and crash?
Yeah, and I said I would include that in the vitamins and minerals before they go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good. And what about AF beta food, the standard processed vitamin or supplement?
AF beta food really helps the liver and the gallbladder process fat and sugar efficiently. So that's not a bad idea either.
All right. So that's more of an overall thing, whereas the chromium picolinate is something that is specifically for stabilizing the blood sugar.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. So that's good to know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One more thing. I'd only allow them to drink water and not sodas or fruit punch, because that would mean more sugar, obviously. And water might also help the kidneys flush out any extra glucose that's in the blood when it's high.
That's very smart.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I actually, while we were doing this, I made a note for a future episode. We're going to do one about soft drinks, because I think that is a whole area that needs to be discussed.
Yeah, and there's a really good article on Mercola's website from Tom Brady about that.
We'll save that one for later.
Yeah.
All right, good. Now, there's also sugar substitutes, and most of them are very detrimental to your health. Are there any alternatives to sugar that can be used where you can still get something that tastes good?
Yeah, we actually touched on this in our previous episode on diet and weight loss, and that's stevia, Lohan, and xylitol.
Okay.
Yeah.
So those three would sweeten something, aren't going to give you the same type of detrimental effects as something like maltodextrin or refined sugar, And so that gives you the ability, if you want to make something sweet. I know that there's cookbooks and there's recipes out for using those different things. So those would be the ones you would recommend.
That's for sure.
Okay. And so when somebody does have something with stevia or Lohan, or what was the third one?
Xylitol.
That's right, xylitol. How do those alternatives affect the body as compared to regular sugar?
Well, first of all, the top of the list has got to be stevia.
Mm-hmm.
It's less than a calorie. 2 tablespoons is equivalent to 1 cup of sugar.
Mm-hmm.
It will not affect your blood sugar levels and is safe even for a diabetic to use.
It's an herb, right? Or
Yes.
It's from a leaf.
Yeah, it's from a leaf that grows naturally in China and South America.
Yeah, and I think that there was, I don't know if it still is, but I remember there was a whole thing about the FDA just really coming down on it being a sweetener, and instead it's a supplement or some kind of thing like that.
Mm-hmm.
Probably because the sugar industry didn't want the competition.
Probably. Okay, now Lohan, it comes from the Chinese Lohan guao fruit, also known as monk fruit.
Mm.
And this is up to 300 times sweeter than sugar.
Mm-hmm.
Is also less than a calorie, is grown in China and northern Thailand, and has no known negative side effects, and can also be found in liquid or powder form, and you can get it at your health food store or order online.
Okay, good. So that's that one. And then the third one, xylitol.
It's sometimes called birch sugar since it comes from birch and other North American hardwood trees. It is technically a sugar alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's a low-calorie, low-glycemic index sugar alternative that can replace sugar in almost any recipe, but be careful not to spill it on the ground because it is toxic to dogs.
Absolutely. You mentioned that before. And then someone, I think, told me you don't want to overuse it because if you have too much of it, it'll cause you to have gas.
Yeah, and that's also true for most sweeteners.
Oh, is it?
Mm-hmm.
Now, is that most alternative sweeteners or anything including sugar?
All.
Okay, good.
Now, notice I haven't recommended honey or maple syrup because of their high sugar content.
Mm-hmm.
Now, honey also has medicinal properties, but it should not be used on a daily basis.
Okay, so then that's not really a good alternative.
No. And one more very, very important point is that these natural sweeteners, especially stevia and Lohan, usually have additional sweeteners or other chemicals added to them. So it's crucial that you read the labels carefully.
Yes, and that can be true for stevia too, because I remember getting some, can't remember where it was, but it was like really fine white powdery stuff. And I thought, oh, this is great. And I looked at it and I think it had milk sugar or something like that in it.
Yeah, you know what it was?
What?
It was stevia in the raw, which you can get at Walmart. And I actually got that, and I never thought to look at the actual ingredients until someone mentioned that it also contains sugar.
Mm-hmm.
So I was pretty upset when I looked and saw that the first ingredient was maltodextrin.
Oh, God.
Yeah, remember, that's the one with no nutrients, and it has a higher glycemic index than sugar.
That's the bad one.
That's the bad one. Yeah, I couldn't. I was so upset.
I got to call Sam and tell him what they're doing over there.
Yeah, you know, so after that, I purchased sweet leaf stevia sweetener instead, which contains inulin-soluble fiber as the first ingredient.
Okay.
And inulin is found in fruits and vegetables as well as chicory root. It isn't digested or absorbed in the stomach, but passes on through to the intestines where it boosts beneficial bacteria called probiotics. So as a result, it's called a prebiotic because of this health-boosting benefit.
Interesting.
Yeah, and since it adds fiber and bulk to food, it can give you a sensation of fullness without raising your blood sugar levels or adding many calories. And therefore, this makes it an effective appetite suppressant too.
All right, so that's something that's in the sweet leaf stevia?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that was something good to put in there, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Mm-hmm.
All right, great information. Now, is there anything else you'd like to say before we end?
Yeah, I'd like to share a personal story concerning sugar, going way back to when I was very young.
All right.
So when I was in kindergarten, I almost flunked. Mm-hmm. Not because of my grades, but because of my behavior. Mm-hmm. It seemed to happen in the afternoons where I was fine during the morning, and then in the afternoon, I just turned into this little monster. I would slide around yelling whoopee, knocking things over. I remember my pants actually had patches on where the knees were because I would slide so much.
Mm-hmm.
And they warned my first grade teacher about me that I was this little monster and watch out. Well, when I was in first grade, I was perfectly behaved and they couldn't understand what the heck they were talking about. But then second grade came and I was a little monster again. So never figured this out until I was in college learning about nutrition. I took a nutrition class on sugar. And it turns out I remember when we were in kindergarten, she used to give us milk and cookies in the afternoon. And as you know, Mom would never give us stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it just wired me up. And then in first grade, they never gave us anything. But in second grade, we had these little wicker baskets on our desk full of hard candy. And so I'd eat about half of them. By the end of the day, I was climbing the walls.
Wow.
So this hits home with me. And I've helped a lot of children through the years, especially that have been diagnosed with ADHD, hyperactivity. And a good chunk of the time, it's sugar. There's other things like food preservatives and colorings and other things and other sensitivities that could be causing it. But I'm so grateful that back then they weren't pushing Ritalin like they are today with children in school.
That's very fortunate.
Yeah.
Interesting. So that was fortunate that you had that going on back in the 60s and 70s rather than today. But I bet that was a relief for you to figure out what was going on during those years.
It was the 70s. Come on, I'm not that old.
Well, that's true. All right. Well, it was during the 70s, but I'm sure it was a relief for you to figure out what was going on, that you weren't just a wild nut, that it was actually the sugar that was causing that to happen.
Yes. Thank goodness for that.
That's great. All right. So thanks for sharing that, Steve.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're at the end of this episode. This was really good information. I learned a lot from it again. And next week, we're going to talk about the modern day acupuncture alternative called dry needling. In fact, it's a new drug-free way to poke your pain away. So we're going to be discussing that next week in the next episode. And thanks again, Steve.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks for joining us this week on the Body Chat Podcast. We both really appreciate your time and your attention. We want to provide you with interesting and informative episodes each week. And if you have a topic you'd like us to cover or any questions you'd like us to answer, send an email to us at info@bodychatpodcast.com. That's info@bodychatpodcast.com. Next week, we're going to chat about a new drug-free way to poke your pain away. To make sure you don't miss any of our upcoming episodes, subscribe to the Body Chat Podcast now on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or Spotify. See you next week.